Hello. For my paper and presentation topic, I chose psychosocial development in late adulthood. That's a long, complicated way to say old age and the aging process. Why look at old age and aging in general? So, the reason I chose this topic was primarily because I thought this is a universal topic that is relevant to almost all of us. Hopefully, we will all age and grow old, so this is something that will be personally relevant to most of us. Also, we all have family members. We have parents, grandparents, family members, loved ones that will also go through the aging process, and we're going to be part of that. So I think it is almost universally relevant to everyone. Um, Also, this is not exciting or glamorous as a topic. Nobody is excited to age. People don't necessarily look forward to old age and the end of life type experiences, but it is important, and I think maybe to some extent it's overlooked by researchers and writers in psychology. Just some background on aging. According to Erickson's stages of development, this is the eighth and final stage of development. He calls that ego integrity versus despair. What we're doing here, according to Erickson, is we're looking for the virtue of wisdom, and we get to that by resolving the internal conflict that people face at this stage of development, and that is reconciling and accepting the lives they lived, and attaining a sense of wholeness and completeness about those lives without falling into sort of the temptation of despair when we imagine the life that could have been lived, or the life we could have had if circumstances were different, or if we had made different choices or different decisions at different points in our lives. So if we successfully resolve this conflict, we attain the virtue of wisdom. If we do not successfully resolve the conflict, there can be lots of negative emotions and feelings that develop from that, including things like bitterness and despair, anxiety, and a fear of death and dying. There's been several different theories advanced about aging to kind of organize and explain the aging process. One of those early theories was called disengagement theory. Basically, the argument here is that older people gradually reduce their social involvement and they withdraw into themselves. This is a normative process according to the theory, and it's motivated by a person's sense of approaching death and their normal decrease in physical function and ability that characterizes old age. A later theory that was developed somewhat in response to disengagement theory would be activity theory, and that holds that social detachment is not usual or normative, and that the key to successful aging is keeping social connections and maintaining the social roles established early in life. This theory of aging is less deterministic, it's more optimistic because the individual has agency. This theory can be kind of summarized by saying we are what we do. So, according to activity theory, we should remain active, and that activity is a key part of successful aging. Continuity theory is a little bit similar to activity theory. The difference is primarily that continuity theory holds that a person needs to maintain connections between past and present. Activity is important, but it's not just because it's activity. We're not staying busy to be busy, but because it represents a continuation of the previous lifestyle that we've lived. Essentially, continuity theory argues that elderly people should continue the interests and activities they enjoyed before earlier in their lives. Now, obviously, there is a problem with continuity theory, a criticism, and that would be that as people enter old age, particularly advanced old age, it is quite likely that they may not be able to continue the activities that they had done before. The interests that they had earlier in life really may not be feasible as they get into more advanced years. So these theories of aging are important. They're helpful to kind of understand the process and to organize information. But there are also practical considerations that are important in understanding old age, and I considered those as well in my paper. Specifically, I was looking at the importance of adjustment with living arrangements for senior citizens. In particular, I looked at the senior citizens living alone. So the question is, why do older people tend to live alone? And there are several reasons for this. Elderly people want to age in place, meaning they want to remain in their own homes, in their own communities, if that is possible. A significant number of older adults live alone for reasons that are largely intuitive that I think we would probably all be able to describe if asked. Number one, as people age, there is an increasing likelihood of a spouse having passed away, which results, of course, in many cases in a person living alone. In late adulthood, children from earlier in life are very much likely to be grown and no longer living at home. People desire to maintain autonomy and independence as they age. And I think a big part of living alone is that people do not want to be burdens on their children or their grandchildren. So they want to live alone for that reason. Older Americans are much more likely to live alone than are older people in the rest of the world. According to Pew Research, 27% of Americans aged 60 and older live alone, compared to only 16% of similarly aged people in other countries. There are a number of problems associated with older people living alone. Financial considerations are important. I think we all understand how expensive it is to maintain a household. Elderly people sometimes have very difficult financial conditions because they are not employed and they are working on fixed incomes, primarily Social Security for many. That limits the ability that some people do have. Also, as people age, they tend to have more physical limitations than what we see earlier in life. Physical limitations, primarily limitations on mobility. This is important if you live alone. Can you go up and down a staircase? Can you climb the stairs to your porch? Are you able to get in and out of a bathtub without someone being present to help? Those are issues, especially as you get into advanced older age. A big issue with people living alone, and a topic in my paper, was mental health and well-being, asking whether living alone is healthy for senior citizens. I think intuitively we might assume that living alone is not an optimal solution for senior citizens, for the reasons you might think, primarily loneliness. However, the literature does seem to suggest that that may not be true. I reviewed an article titled, "Does Living Alone Exacerbate Depression in Older Adults?" And this article is an examination of a Chinese case study, a very large study with data from 2013, 2015, and 2018. In this study, the results indicate that living alone was associated with lower depression levels compared with senior citizens living with their adult children. This association was observed when the older adult continued to live in close proximity to their children. But nonetheless, it does indicate that even in terms of mental health, that it may be beneficial in terms of depression for older people to live independently in proximity to adult children and not with those children. So I think these findings suggest perhaps an optimal living arrangement that may be considered, in that it keeps people close to their children and their family members to support social and family relationships, but it also maintains independence and autonomy. There was also an interesting connection in the study that suggested that the benefits to living alone in proximity to your children was observed in people that lived in rural areas and not necessarily in people residing in urban areas, which may suggest a need for additional research, particularly when you consider that urban areas tend to have more services available that elderly people tend to need versus what's available in rural areas. So I think that does indicate we need more research in the area. And then in conclusion, old age and the aging process are important for research and discussion for the reasons we started with, primarily that it's relevant to almost everyone. We are all going to be, hopefully, we're all going to be aging at some point. We will all have family members and friends and relatives that are aging. So we do have a vested interest here, I think. And also as society, we need to be prepared to address needs of a vulnerable population. And I think, in my view, economic conditions will make it more likely that older people are going to continue to live alone. So if that is going to occur, we need to look at the options we have to make that as successful as possible.